the gap, standing for Jesus. Standing in the gap for family and friends. Standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in.
Now, one thing that we've begun to do with this broadcast, because it's necessary, so much is happening in this world today. I mean, from week to week, if you're watching the news and the things that are going on, you should be able to understand that we're in the midst of spiritual warfare, because there are all kind of battles going on, all kind of demons and devils jumping up and wanting to lead you this way and lead you that way. So we want to make you aware. We want to keep you aware of what's going on in the world today. And this segment of the broadcast we call Gap News, and Marvel is in charge of that section. I'm turning it back over to her.
I'm back, Saints. I'm back. So, there's so much going on every day. I can't even recount it all. We got wars all over the place. We got mass shootings. They say we've had, on the average, 2 mass shootings a day in America. That's crazy. That's crazy. But I decided today to look into what's going on with women in charge.
Let me ask you about a moment in your book that happens on January 4th. It's described in chapter 9 of your book, and you describe listening in on a call in which Trump lawyers are briefing what we call surrogates. So it's basically people are going to go on TV and talk about the pro-Trump side of things. Yeah. And on that call, Trump lawyer Jenna Ellis describes what they're envisioning for January 6th. She says, the way you write it is, in the scenario Ellis described, when Pence was presiding, he could either refuse to open or refuse to count the electoral votes. So they don't necessarily know you're on this call. You're listening in. Right. It's 2 days before January 6th. Was that the moment when it really became clear to you in detail what they were going to try to do?
Yes. I had heard, obviously, there had been talk about we're going to have these electors meet. I think Stephen Miller had been talking about that. But it wasn't clear to me what the contours of this particular part of the plan were until I dialed into that phone call. And listening to them describe how these fake electors were going to be used, and the fact that they anticipated that Vice President Pence was going to use them to refuse to count the legitimate electors was certainly a moment of intense concern. And as I got off that call, I ran into the Capitol, into the office of the parliamentarian of the House, to say, wait a minute, this is what I'm hearing is going to happen. What do we do about it in the joint session? How do we stop this? And it was very clear that there were not a lot of good answers to that, because I learned later through the investigation that Vice President Pence and his counsel were having discussions with the Senate parliamentarian, and that the Vice President, ultimately, of course, did his duty bravely. Mm-hmm. But if you're in a joint session of Congress, you're not in a position where there are a lot of legislative steps that you can take, except to basically, move to adjourn. So it was a very dangerous and chilling moment. Jim Jordan knew more about what Donald Trump had planned for January 6th than any other member of the House of Representatives. And if the Republicans decide that Jim Jordan should be the Speaker of the House, there will, and by the way, I don't think that's going to happen. I think he'll lose. But if they were to decide that, there would no longer be any possible way to argue that a group of elected Republicans could be counted on to defend the Constitution.
Thank you for joining us. I'm here with the prosecutors and investigators who have worked diligently on the investigation of criminal attempts to interfere in the administration of Georgia's 2020 presidential election. Today, based on information developed by that investigation, a Fulton County grand jury returned a true bill of indictment, charging 19 individuals with violations of Georgia law arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in this state. The indictment includes 41 felony counts and is 97 pages long. Please remember that everyone charged in this bill of indictment is presumed innocent. Specifically, the indictment brings felony charges against Donald John Trump, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, John Charles Eastman, Mark Randall Meadows, John Cheeseborough, Jeffrey Clark, Jenna Lynn Ellis, Ray Stallings Smith III, Robert David Cheeley, Michael A. Roman, David James Schaefer, Sean Micah Tresher Steele, Stephen Cliffgard Lee, Harrison William Prescott Floyd, Travion C. Cootie, Sydney Catherine Powell, Kathleen Austin Latham, Scott Graham Hall, and Misty Hampton, also known as Emily Misty Hayes. Every individual charged in the indictment is charged with one count of violating Georgia's Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act through participation in a criminal enterprise in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere to accomplish the illegal goal of allowing Donald J. Trump to seize the presidential term of office beginning on January 20th, 21.
The Attorney General committed fraud, and you just saw it right up there. She's a fraud. This whole case is a fraud. It's election interference. It's keeping me here instead of Iowa and New Hampshire. You just saw it. The Attorney General's a fraud. She committed fraud.
Mr. Trump's comments were offensive, they were baseless, they were void of any facts and/or any evidence. What they were comments that unfortunately fomented violence, and comments that I would describe as race baiting, and comments, unfortunately, that appeals to the bottom of our humanity. This case was brought simply because it was a case where individuals have engaged in a pattern and practice of fraud. And I will not sit idly by and allow anyone to subvert the law. And lastly, I will not be bullied. And so Mr. Trump is no longer here. The Donald Trump show is over. This was nothing more than a political stunt, a fundraising stop. And now we can continue to go forward with our trial, and we are confident that justice will be served. Thank you all for coming.
We're following breaking news in the election interference case facing the disgraced, twice impeached, thrice indicted ex-president. Moments before we came on air, Judge Tanya Chutkan issuing a protective order in that case. By now, the Trump team's legal playbook is no secret. Invoke the First Amendment, delay, and try the case in the media. It is their calling card. But today, Trump's legal shenanigans may have met their match in the form of Judge Tanya Chutkan, who signaled she was having none of it. Today was the first hearing before Judge Chutkan in the 2020 election interference case against Donald Trump. Kind of preview of how she'll run her court and this case. And in deciding whether to grant special counsel Jack Smith's request for a protective order limiting what the disgraced ex-president can and cannot say publicly about the case, Judge Chutkan appeared to cut through many of Trump's typical talking points like a hot knife through butter. On those First Amendment protections the Trump team is so fond of citing, Judge Chutkan said this, quote, Mr. Trump, like every American, has a First Amendment right to free speech, but that right is not absolute, adding that without a protective order, the disclosure of discovery materials could lead to witnesses being harassed or otherwise interfering with a fair trial. What about the fact that Trump is running for president? Judge Chutkan did not mince words on that either, saying, quote, this is a criminal trial. I cannot and I will not factor into my decisions the effect it's going to have on a political campaign for either side. Quote, I intend to ensure that your client is afforded all the rights he's entitled to. The existence of a political campaign is not going to have any bearing on my decision. I intend to keep politics out of this. And on Trump's habit of using Truth Social to test drive potential defenses, Judge Chutkan had this to say, quote, your client's defense is supposed to happen in this courtroom, not on the internet. And to the extent your client wants to make statements on the internet, they always have to yield to witness security and witness safety. Adding, quote, I could see the possibility for a lot of problems here. Indeed. Now, we should point out Judge Chutkan did not grant the sweeping protective order Special Counsel Jack Smith had asked for. Both sides got some of what they were seeking, but make no mistake. In her words and in her demeanor on the bench today, Judge Chutkan put Trump and his legal team on notice that she did not come to play.
I'm Ben Meiselas with Karen Friedman-Agnifilo from Legal AF, and we have a breaking news alert. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has affirmed most of the federal judge Tanya Chutkan's gag order imposed on Donald Trump in the D.C. federal criminal case against Donald Trump for his attempt to overthrow the results of the 2020 election. Here is what the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled. Specifically, the gag order in the district court is affirmed to the extent it prohibits all parties and their counsel from making or directing others to make public statements about known or reasonably foreseeable witnesses concerning their potential participation in the investigation or in this criminal proceeding. The order is also affirmed to the extent it prohibits all parties and their counsel from making or directing others to make public statements about, one, counsel in this case, other than the special counsel, two, members of the court staff and counsel staff, or three, the family members of any counsel or staff member, if those statements are made with the intent to materially interfere with or to cause others to materially interfere with counsel's or staff's work in this criminal case, or with the knowledge that such interference is highly likely to result. We vacate the order to the extent it covers speech beyond those specified categories. This was a 68-page order and some really powerful stuff in here, Karen. For example, the Court of Appeals found the record before the district court and its factual findings demonstrate that some of Mr. Trump's speech poses a significant and imminent threat to the fair and orderly adjudication of the criminal proceeding against him. They go through and cite Donald Trump saying, if you go after me, I'm coming after you. His threats to former Vice President Pence, his threats against Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, his threats against Mark Meadows. And then it goes on to say the record shows that former President Trump's words have real-world consequences. Many of those on the receiving end of his attacks pertaining to the 2020 election have been subjected to a torrent of threats and intimidation from his supporters. Goes on to say Mr. Trump himself recognizes the power of his words and their effect on his audience, agreeing that his supporters, quote, listen to him like no one else. And then the court concluded, we do not allow such an order lightly. Mr. Trump is a former president and current candidate for the presidency, and there is a strong public interest in what he has to say. But Mr. Trump is also an indicted criminal defendant, and he must stand trial in a courtroom under the same procedures that govern all other criminal defendants. That is what the rule of law means. Power.
But out of all of the reasons that Donald Trump should never be anywhere close to the Oval Office again, this may seem like a minor one, but his volcanic temper, he deserves to be nowhere near the nuclear code button. So I think that, for Americans listening to this and to know that how he reacts so irrationally to things that his own handpicked attorney general is telling him that is the truth. I think that we should let the ketchup be splayed on the walls at Mar-a-Lago, and I'm sure there's plenty of it down there nowadays.
Last night, Donald Trump said he will be a dictator on day one. Do you think he'll be a dictator on day two?
I think Donald Trump poses an extreme threat to American security and American prosperity. I think that a vote for Donald Trump is a vote for a fascist government. I think Donald Trump prioritizes authoritarian rule over rule of law. And yes, I mean, Donald Trump has told us who he is for years and years. So for him to even joke about being a dictator, we need to believe what he says. Everybody needs to believe what he says. And we have seen that this is the trajectory that it's going in. There are constitutional experts that have seen that this is the direction that it's going in. And I think Americans also need to understand just how fragile our democracy is. We almost lost our democracy and our constitutional republic on January 6th. And the only reason we didn't is because there were good people in the government that helped it survive. I don't think that we would have that same scenario again.
Those are some women in charge, aren't they? I did put it together, but I love the way we've got people like Liz Chaney. She's come out with a book now, and she's telling it all. She's on this call, and people didn't know she was listening, and she's letting it out, telling people, what's going on, and the level of danger. And then we ended up with Cassidy Hutchinson. She was the bravest person in the whole January 6th. If you ask me, the bravest person in the whole January 6th trial, in that she came out and told the truth when people were not telling the truth. And then we've got Fani Willis, we got Judge Chutkan, we got Letitia, what's her last name? James. Powerful lawyers and prosecutors and judges. What you think about this, honey?
That was great. I just asked a question to people is, do you like democracy? Because when I look back through history, democracy is the only thing that kept them from killing as many of us as they could and shipping the rest off to Africa. Okay? Understand, that's what fueled the civil rights movement. That's what's caused a lot of us to advance as much as we can. And they want to strip all that away. They did that over in the 1930s in Germany.
That didn't end out well, did it?
And fascism came in there. And so what did they do? They directed their attention to a minority group of people and murdered and slaughtered millions. That's what happens when your democracy goes away and somebody gets in charge who just worships power. And it's amazing to me that the ones that are standing out so boldly in this are women. Where are the men? All standing over the corner with a big yellow streak up their back.
You look at those people in Congress, the senators and the congressmen. You're right. They got a big yellow streak up their back. Either they're not saying anything or they're parroting crazy talk.
And that's what happened in Germany.
Yes.
A vast majority of those people didn't want that to happen, but they just stood by and let it happen to the point where they had no more control over it to do anything. And the guy took their country down to ruin.
Sure.
And
did.
so, when I see this type of thing, the question comes to my mind is that, well, I don't know, do people like democracy or not? And what's the alternative? And for us, I think there's only one answer to that. You look at the black. I mean, the women, but look at the black women stepping up and standing up, and that's amazing. Now that's not to throw any water on the New York prosecutor, DA.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, he's doing something too, but this was women in charge.
This was women in charge, and apparently they're in charge.
They say Judge Chutkan didn't come to play.
All righty. That's Gap News, and I think